If you are an international student in the United States, or you have a son, daughter, spouse, or employee here on a student visa, you have probably seen the same headline. Reports that hundreds of student visas have been canceled or revoked in recent weeks, and a high-profile defense of that crackdown from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, including the line, "No one is entitled to a student visa." Here is why this matters. A single word in these stories, visa cancellation, can be misunderstood, and that misunderstanding can lead people to panic, make sudden travel choices, drop out of school unnecessarily, or do the opposite and ignore a serious problem until it is too late. By the end of this video, you will know 3 things. First, the difference between your visa sticker and your immigration status inside the US, and why that difference is everything. Second, who tends to be at higher risk in these kinds of enforcement waves, and who is usually not the target. Third, a practical do this and avoid this checklist that can help you protect your status, your school record, and your ability to travel safely. Now, before we go further, a quick grounding point. What we have are reports of increased revocations and public statements defending a tougher approach. What we do not have, at least from the information in the headline alone, is a single, detailed, universal rule that applies to every student from every country at every school. So we are going to stick to what can be explained accurately, how revocations and status issues work, what the common triggers and timelines look like, and what safe steps you can take today without speculating. Here is the part most people miss. A student visa and student status are related, but they are not the same thing. Your visa is the entry document, usually a sticker in your passport, that you use to ask for admission at a U.S. port of entry. Your status is what you have after you are admitted, and it is governed by your I-94 record, the rules for your category, and your ongoing compliance with those rules, like staying enrolled full-time in many F1 situations, keeping your SCIS record active, and not violating work restrictions. So when you hear visa canceled or revoked, the first question is, are you currently inside the United States, or are you outside and planning to enter? Because the consequences can be very different. If you are inside the US and your visa is revoked, that can affect your ability to travel and return, but it does not automatically erase your lawful status in the US. That is not a promise that everything is fine, but it is a crucial distinction. If you are outside the US and your visa is revoked, then you may not be able to use that visa to enter, and you may have to go through a new visa application process. And if your underlying SCIS record is terminated, or you otherwise fall out of status, that is a different problem entirely. So let's slow this down and define the core terms in plain English. Visa revocation. The State Department can revoke a visa. That means the visa is no longer valid for travel and admission. Status violation. That is about what you do while you are in the US and whether you continue meeting the conditions of your status. SCIS record issues. For many students, your school maintains your SCIS record, and certain actions, like dropping below a required course load without approval, can lead to termination of the record. Termination can put your status at risk. And then there is removal or deportation, which is a separate enforcement process. A revoked visa does not equal deportation. That is myth number 1 we need to kill right now. Myth versus reality moment. Myth: my visa was canceled, so ICE will show up tomorrow and deport me. Reality: visa revocation typically affects your ability to travel and re-enter. It can also be a warning sign that your case is being scrutinized. But removal is a separate process with its own steps. You still need to take the situation seriously, but panic decisions can make it worse. Now let's talk about who is most likely to be affected in a reported crackdown like this, and who typically is not. I am going to give you clear buckets, but remember, every case is individual, and your school and your record matter. Higher risk bucket 1. Students with prior arrests, charges, or convictions, even if you think the issue was minor or resolved. Visa adjudication and revocation decisions can be tied to criminal history, even old history, and even outcomes that are not convictions can still trigger review. Higher risk bucket 2. Students with status problems, such as unauthorized work, failure to maintain full-time enrollment when required, or a terminated SEVIS record. Higher risk bucket 3. Students who travel frequently or are currently outside the U.S. because visas matter most at the border. If your visa is revoked while you are abroad, your plan can collapse overnight. Higher risk bucket 4. Students whose records have inconsistencies, like mismatched program information, unclear funding documentation, or changes that were not properly updated in school systems. Now, a lower risk bucket, meaning people who are usually not the focus of revocation waves, even though no one gets a guarantee. Students who are fully enrolled, in good academic standing, with a clean compliance history, and who are not traveling in the middle of uncertainty, tend to be better positioned. Also, students who have maintained status and have strong documentation, like up-to-date I-20s or DS 2019s, and clear proof of enrollment and address, tend to have fewer problems at the border. Here is another part most people miss. Some people confuse a visa revocation with a SEVIS termination notice, and those are very different experiences. Your school is typically the first place you learn about a SEVIS issue. A visa revocation might come through other channels, and sometimes people only discover it when they try to travel, check their visa status through official processes, or when a consulate refuses boarding or a CBP officer flags it at entry. That brings us to the Rubio statement. When a senior official says no one is entitled to a student visa, there are two practical takeaways that matter for you. First, it signals a stricter discretionary posture. In plain English, officers may be less inclined to give the benefit of the doubt when records are messy or risk factors exist. Second, it reinforces something that has always been true legally. A visa is a permission request, not a right. But here is the caution. Do not overread one quote into a brand new universal rule. The quote can shape tone and enforcement, but your day-to-day compliance still matters more than any headline. Now let's talk about how revocations typically happen, because understanding the mechanism helps you avoid common mistakes. The State Department has authority to revoke visas, and revocations can happen based on information that comes to light after issuance. That information can come from many sources: law enforcement databases, administrative reviews, or updated security checks. Sometimes revocations are targeted and specific. Sometimes they are broader in the sense that more cases are being reviewed. None of this means every student is being investigated, but it does mean you should assume that your record needs to be clean, consistent, and easy to verify. Here is a small detail that changes everything. If you are in the U.S. and your visa is revoked, your status is generally controlled by your I-94 and your compliance, not by the visa sticker itself. The visa is mainly an entry document. That is why people can remain in lawful status in the U.S. with an expired visa, as long as they are maintaining status. But again, do not confuse that with safety to travel. If you leave, you may need a valid visa to come back, and if yours is revoked, you might be stuck abroad. Myth versus reality moment number 2. Myth. If my visa is revoked while I am in the U.S., I must immediately leave the country. Reality. Immediate departure is not automatically required just because the visa sticker is no longer valid, but you must assess your status and risks carefully, ideally with your school international office and, if needed, qualified legal help. Leaving at the wrong time can create a re-entry crisis. Staying while out of status can create a different crisis. The right answer depends on facts. Now let's move into real-world consequences, because this is where families get hurt by confusion. First consequence: travel plans. If you have a spring break trip, a family emergency trip, or any travel outside the U.S., this is where you should slow down. If there is increased revocation activity, travel becomes higher stakes. You need to confirm your documents are current, your travel signature is valid if required, and you have a plan if something changes while you are away. Second consequence: work authorization and internships. For F1 students, things like on-campus work, CPT, and OPT have strict rules. A crackdown environment can mean more scrutiny of whether the employment is authorized, whether it matches the program, and whether your school paperwork is correct. The key is not to stop your authorized work out of fear, but to make sure it is truly authorized and documented. Third consequence: school registration and course load. Dropping below required enrollment without prior approval is one of the most common preventable mistakes. People do it for financial reasons, health reasons, or because they are overwhelmed. Some of those situations can be handled with proper approvals and documentation, but doing it informally can trigger a USCIS problem. Fourth consequence: processing delays and administrative reviews. Even if you do everything right, a stricter environment can mean slower visa appointments, longer security checks, and more requests for documentation. That affects students abroad and also families who are trying to coordinate travel for commencements and visits. Now let me give you an example scenario, composite and hypothetical, but realistic. Example scenario 1. Lena is an F1 student in the US, fully enrolled. She has an internship authorized by CPT. She plans to travel home for 2 weeks. A few days before departure, she hears about visa cancellations and panics. She considers leaving immediately to beat the system. That is the wrong instinct. The better move is to confirm her I-20 is up to date, confirm her CPT authorization dates match her internship, get a proper travel signature if needed, and speak with her school international office about any alerts they have seen. Then she decides whether travel is worth the risk right now. If she cannot tolerate the possibility of being delayed abroad, she postpones travel. This is the kind of decision that protects her future options. Example scenario 2. Arjun is also an F1 student. He started doing freelance work online and getting paid, assuming it was harmless because the client is outside the US. Later, he applies for a new visa abroad and gets questioned about his work history. In a stricter environment, that kind of unauthorized work can become the centerpiece of a denial or revocation decision. The lesson is not that everyone is in trouble. The lesson is that small choices can suddenly matter a lot when enforcement tightens. Now, what should you do now? Here is a practical checklist, written as do this and avoid this. Do this. Keep copies of your key documents in one place, both digital and printed for travel. That includes your passport bio page, visa page, I-94 record, I-20 or DS-2019, enrollment verification, and any work authorization documentation like CPT, OPT approvals if applicable. Do this. Check that your address and contact information are current with your school and any required systems. Do this. Stay in close contact with your designated school official or international student office. In periods of uncertainty, they often see patterns first, and they can confirm whether your USCIS record is active and correct. Do this. If you are planning international travel, build a risk plan. Ask yourself, if I am delayed abroad for weeks, can I keep my classes, housing, job, and finances stable? If the answer is no, consider delaying travel. Do this. Monitor official sources for updates. That includes your school communications and official U.S. government pages for travel and visa information. Avoid this. Do not take action based on screenshots, viral posts, or anonymous claims that say everyone from a certain school or country is being canceled. Treat those as unverified until you see a credible source. Avoid this. Do not drop classes, withdraw, or stop attending without talking to your school office first. Many status problems start with one uncoordinated schedule change. Avoid this. Do not work off the books or outside the scope of your authorization. If you are not sure whether something is authorized, pause and ask your school office or a qualified professional before you do it. Avoid this. Do not lie or hide information in a future visa interview. Misrepresentation can create long-term problems that are far worse than a short-term denial. Here is a quick myth versus reality moment number 3. Myth. If my visa is revoked, I can just reapply and it will be routine. Reality. Reapplying can be straightforward for some people, but in a heightened scrutiny environment, a revocation can lead to tougher questions and longer checks. You should prepare carefully and expect more documentation requests. Now let's talk about what to monitor next, because this is where you can stay ahead without spiraling. Watch point 1. Are there any official public updates from the State Department, DHS components, or school guidance that clarifies categories of concern? If yes, focus on the exact wording. Watch point 2. Patterns reported by schools. Are specific issues coming up repeatedly, like certain documentation gaps or travel-related problems? Watch point 3. Border experience reports, but treat them carefully. Individual CBP interactions vary. Still, if multiple credible reports point to a specific question line, like funding proof or program details, that can be a signal to prepare those documents. Watch point 4. Demand surges. When more students try to reapply at once, visa appointment wait times can grow. That matters for anyone planning to travel and return for a semester start date. Now, if you already received some kind of notice, or you suspect a problem, here are safe next steps that do not require speculation. First, do not ignore it. Save the message, note dates, and get clarity on what it actually says. Second, contact your school international office and ask a simple question. Is my SCIS record active and correct today? Third, if you are outside the U.S. and you learn your visa was revoked, do not book non-refundable travel to the U.S. until you know what is required for a new visa. Fourth, if you are inside the U.S. and you are worried about status, focus on compliance, enrollment, documentation, and authorized activity. If there is a complex issue like an arrest record or a prior status violation, consider getting individualized help from a qualified immigration attorney because the strategy can vary. And here is the calm but urgent reminder. The worst thing you can do is make irreversible moves, like leaving the U.S. in a panic, quitting school suddenly, or accepting unauthorized work without understanding your exact situation. Now let's wrap this up with a clear recap. 1. Reports of increased student visa cancellations and public defenses of tougher enforcement are a signal to tighten your compliance and documentation. 2. Visa revocation and status in the U.S. are not the same thing, but travel is the pressure point where problems explode. 3. Higher-risk cases tend to involve prior criminal issues, status violations, unauthorized work, or messy records, while students in good standing are generally better positioned. 4. Your school international office is your first stop for SCIS and status-related questions, and official government sources are your best reference for visa policy. 5. Take practical steps today. Organize documents, confirm records, pause risky travel, and do not rely on rumors. If you found this useful, subscribe and turn on notifications, because when policy tone shifts, the details and the timelines matter, and we will break down what is verifiable and what is not, without panic. And if you are a student watching this, remember, stay calm, stay organized, and focus on the things you can control.